There have been a number of requests for some additional details, some additional guidance on Task 4. This is a completely appropriate request considering that this is what we have been doing in the classroom throughout the course of the semester as we develop Task 4. And so I want to go ahead and put this out here in a digital format so that you all have access to this information. I mean, the key here is that each one of you is working on an individual project. It means that there's going to be a lot of variation. And so certainly keep that in mind as we're going through this, that maybe one of the best things you can do, and a few students have already done this, is go ahead and put together kind of a list of deliverables. What you're expecting to actually produce in the end, and bring that to your weekly check-in so that you and I can actually discuss that and see if you're actually headed in the right direction. One of the best resources I have available to kind of point you in the right direction here on Task 4 is actually the capstone booklet from 2019. 2019 marked the first year of the new capstone format for this course. And you're going to see that in Task 4 especially that very little of the assignment sheet changed. There is quite a bit of, there are quite a few differences when we look at tasks 1 through 3 in terms of the expectations and what the students were providing. But when it comes to task 4, it's almost verbatim, right? The wording in your assignment sheet is very similar to the wording in their assignment sheet. And you're going to see a lot of variation. Again, individual based projects. So as you're developing your list of deliverables, your to-do list for your capstone project, one of the things I would suggest doing is going through the capstone booklet. I'm going to go through some examples here on the coming slides, but just look through this yourself and see if there's other things that jump out. Remember, there's a lot of variability in terms of quality, but it's a good place to start. Another place to start is same place here on Blackboard where you can access the capstone booklet. It's in Blackboard under content, under capstone project resources. You'll find all of this information. But there's also the examples that are listed here, and these are both professional and student ASLA winning examples. You can look to those for other ideas for how you can start to efficiently communicate your capstone proposal. Here in Task 4, we're really just focused on these final, project posters, the very, developing the site scale detail, your primary landscape intervention, any secondary interventions that are going to go ahead and support your overall framework plan for the area. That's what we're working on here, and so that's the breakdown we're going to have in the next few slides. What I've done on this page is just taken the assignment sheet and really broken it down into its core elements. Hopefully this will help simplify ththings for all of you. But basically what you're going to see here is what we're going to talk about on the following slides. And so, certainly on the left-hand column, you're going to see you have, your image or precedent board. This is part of our design process, is looking to examples of both program and form and drawing those in. Your landscape intervention number 1. Again, a lot of this goes back to the connection between your landscape framework plan and these, specific design proposals you're putting forward. Your landscape framework plan is making a recommendation about, the primary area, the area you're going to intervene and have the greatest impact on. But many of you also have secondary areas that also need additional detail, or additional challenges that need to be met in order to address the community need. That's where landscape framework plan revision really comes in, is that as you design, you're going to find you're going to make some changes to that overall framework plan. And I think that definitely needs to be reflected in the submission that comes together here for Task 4. Your stakeholder review is more challenging. What I'll tell you is this: as a professional landscape architect, you're going to need to figure out how to communicate and work with different stakeholders. We've talked about in the past that budget sometimes limits this. That's why you need to be efficient. Right now, during this particular crisis, one of the things you're going to run into is that people aren't necessarily as available as they were. They're dealing with lots of other things in their lives. What I would like to see is a documented attempt from each one of you to go ahead and reach out to one of your stakeholders and share some of your design thoughts at a preliminary stage in order to get some feedback and see where that can go moving forward. And so the best projects have greater stakeholder involvement. We know that, but I also recognize this is a challenging semester. Lastly, the weekly project meetings. This is something we're already taking care of. This slide goes ahead and breaks down some of the grading criteria. And I know that sometimes when you're kind of looking through this in the assignment sheet that some of this doesn't make sense. especially when you're first getting going, because you're really looking for that simple list of what do you want me to produce, right? That I provided on the previous slide. But the reality of it is that because landscape architects don't produce one, we don't produce, the same design solution and apply that solution to multiple sites over and over and over again like a civil engineer would. What we're really doing here is that we're developing unique design approaches. And so this is how I go about grading it. And I really do evaluate your capstone projects based on, here on the left-hand side, I call it design detail. It's, for me, this is the complexity of the program. Is there a strong relationship between program elements? And then how well have you communicated that out? And I use the term details again here because the level of detail depends on how big a site you're taking on. If you have something that's relatively small, I want to see, everything down to site furnishings, and I want to see plant material recommendations that are actually getting specific to the name of those plants. But if we're working on a large site, 100 acres or bigger than 100 acres, you're not going to be able to give me all of that detail for the entire site. You might be able to do some specific call outs that actually address that, in various areas of the site to kind of give a vocabulary of an approach here, but you're not going to be able to get down to that same level of detail. I understand that. That's part of the grading process. On the right-hand side, what you're seeing here, it talks about the design solution or cohesion. And what I'm really trying to tell you here is that we as designers know that we use, design form. So, where we take our cues, have we developed a consistent design form that is reflected throughout the design, or does it look chaotic, right? Does this look like a cohesive design solution? That's what I'm looking for here. So there's certainly a form component of this, but there's also, have you made a social or ecological impact on the site? Knowing that in all projects we have to make tough decisions, and sometimes you prioritize, one goal over another, but that's something that you need to communicate as a designer. It's the one reason that, the impact model that I'll be doing a separate video on is really an intentional part of the geodesign process, because it challenges us as designers to not, leave this open-ended. Don't force the client or the stakeholders to try and guess at what you were trying to accomplish or which goals you prioritized. Go ahead and state it outright in the design process, because if we were wrong and that isn't the community's priorities or isn't our client's priorities, we want to know it here in the design process where we can change and adapt. For your precedent imagery board, one of the things that you can go ahead and pull together is just a overall poster that has an organized approach to all of the different, character images that are inspiring either form or program or function within your site, or some of the site details. And you can use that board to then, use labels on that board to then go ahead and reference out to other posters. That approach is actually a really clean response to going ahead and incorporating, other ideas to help you communicate your design solution. A different response, though, is what Kelly has done here on this particular set of boards, is that you can see that Kelly has gone ahead and incorporated key character images into almost every one of her final Task 4 boards. And either approach is really acceptable, so it's just up to you how you want to organize the information you're providing. And in this slide, what you're seeing is Tucker's response to his primary landscape intervention. The one reason I go ahead and include Tucker's response here, what I like about his site plan, is that he is working on a very, very large site, significantly over that 100-acre size. And so the level of detail here is somewhat modest, right? But what he's done as a response to increase his ability to communicate about this is that he's gone back to his primary client's goals for this project. And he's gone ahead and he's linked them in so that each of the labels here is actually linked to the different goals, and he can speak to this in his narrative then as which parts of this design are really accomplishing what the client has laid out as the primary community design problem. But one of the things that I want to caution as I'm talking about this primary landscape intervention is that, looking at the design book from last year, it's really easy to forget about all of the work that goes in between. And so I'm actually going to borrow just from Joe's work this semester here in 2020. This is a great example of just showing some of that, starting to work out the overall program of the site, starting to work on form. Understand that you have to spend some time working through these other challenges, or you won't get to that comprehensive, cohesive design solution that you're aiming for here at the end of the project. And Tommy took a different approach here on this particular poster layout. So Tommy's overall site master plan is actually incredibly intricate. But he actually chose to go ahead and only include this particular site master plan as kind of a small framework plan where he's referencing all of the various changes. And instead, what he actually focused on in this particular layout is going ahead and dropping in all of the various other details. And so what you're going to see is that he did one of the best jobs of these annotated cross sections that appear down here on the bottom right hand corner. He also did a very great job with the detailed vignette drawings. I'm trying to remember back just through Tommy's submission, but the one thing that I would suggest just looking at this overall is that I think this would have benefited from a single layout looking just at the overall master plan. He's losing some of the detail that he actually put into this design process here. To go ahead and explain the overall design, to explain the form and the decisions that were made around program, and then go ahead and use a layout like this to kind of bring all of these other elements together. So certainly keep that in mind as you're developing your own work here. Jung's project in Gary, I think, is interesting in a lot of various regards, and you're seeing a bunch of different things thrown together here on the slide. He actually has some of his cross sections. They're not well labeled, unfortunately. It's one of the limitations that he had on here is they're not a good example of an annotated cross section. They're a nice cross section, don't get me wrong. He has a very distinct graphic style. One that I actually really came to appreciate is that he was doing a conceptual model for how do you kind of reinvigorate kind of an isolated urban block in the middle of Gary. And so the overall axonometric drawing, the perspective aerial view that he developed here, you can see that most of this was done in SketchUp as a simple 3D model. He then went into Photoshop and laid a number of elements over the top of it. You'll see both, I think that the people, but also the labeling on the buildings, right? How he made basically the architecture disappear into the backdrop on this as just a labeled, space holder in which the landscape weaves itself around is really, really well done, right? I love how he kind of approached that, labeling out these as apartments or retail, right? So that the form of the architecture itself really just becomes the space, it becomes a space holder both in 2D and 3D here, but the landscape comes out of this really, really strongly. The other thing that you'll see he's incorporated here is that he's actually used some of the Google Earth imagery that's out there to incorporate the buildings and the existing 3D environments. Actually what he built this base over the top of. And what you'll actually see in this particular layout is that he's gone ahead and used a purple overlay to kind of wash out some of that cartoonish, Google Earth imagery view, right? It's never perfect. Unless you go in and actually create it yourself, it's never perfect. But what he's done here is he's used a really nice graphic trick for how to make that kind of disappear into the background. Pin Yang's project takes a different approach to that, axonometric or perspective view of the site. One of the things that he's really done here is that he's used this axonometric as his primary site plan, knowing that he had a number of different elements that he felt were better expressed in an aerial view of the site. And so a lot of the details, this is really his site plan in a lot of ways. He's used this particular view to start talking about all of these little detailed vignette drawings of both program and also design detail that he's incorporated in here. There's a lot going on in this design, a lot of that site level detail I was talking about and describing before. So keep this in mind as an example and take a look through his work as well. The final slide here in my detailed explanation of task number 4, I'm just kind of going ahead and stopping on the landscape interventions 2 and 3 and just showing an example here. Michelle did an excellent job of this. If you really want to see a project that took advantage of this model of not just focusing on one primary intervention and providing a lot of detail about it, but rather actually really kind of tying this back to and connecting to that overall landscape framework plan. Michelle did one of the best jobs of this. She's also an ASLA award-winning project with the work that she produced here. This is a really, really well done planning study. And so what you're going to see in this particular example laid out on here is that landscape intervention number 2, number 3, this is really just, it's a, more of the same of what you produced for your primary site intervention, but recognizing that you don't have time to do everything well. We can't design every single space. So what she's done here is that she's produced graphics that I think are at the right level of detail to communicate some ideas, to develop the design enough to be able to kind of speak to it, speak to her intent overall. And I think that that's the power of this particular submission. And so keep all of these ideas in mind as you go ahead and progress forward. But again, to summarize, the best thing you can do at this point in the process is to go ahead and develop a list of deliverables. In some ways, I would actually do mock-ups of my posters just so that I knew what I was aiming for to start filling in the different gaps as I'm pulling this project together. To be honest, that's a good skill set to start working on in general, because as a professional, you're going to be doing this as well. And if you sit down and spend a half an hour actually just taking a pencil and sketching out some ideas for what you're doing in terms of final layout, it's something you can run by a project manager before you actually really get into the work to make sure that you understand what's being expected of you before you start investing lots and lots of time. And so with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and drop off here. Hope you appreciate and enjoyed this description of task number 4.